All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a really unique explainer. We're unpacking a fascinating piece of writing that, well, it actually starts off feeling kind of like a modern fable about animals and time. But then it morphs into this surprisingly profound reflection on life, memory, and aging. It's based on a text simply titled High School Rumens. So let's just jump right in. It kicks off with this line. High school reunions can only bring the disappointment of what is no longer and the depression of noticing the passage of time. Wow. Talk about a hook, right? I mean, that right there is the core existential premise of the author. But hold on a second. Because before we actually get into all that heavy stuff, the author slams on the brakes and pivots to a totally different, fast-paced comedic rant. Which brings us to section 1. The victims of waiting. So the author basically takes on the exasperated tone of a stand-up comedian here, complaining about people he calls the victims of waiting. And honestly, if you've ever shown up on time somewhere only to sit around waiting for literally everyone else, you're going to feel this in your bones. He leans into these animal metaphors to explain it. On one hand, you've got the early birds, the punctual people who actually show up when they're supposed to. And then you have the bats and the owls. The bohemians, the late arrivers who just have zero sense of urgency. And the author argues that the bad habits of this late arriving majority basically end up ruling our entire society. This all builds into what we could call the absurd laws of the jungle. We make these daily concessions for the bad habits of others. Think about it. Pedestrians waiting for cars to cross the street, when really the cars should just stop. Non-smokers forced to breathe in secondhand smoke. Vegetarians having to politely pick around the meat in their food. Or even smart people just staying quiet in a conversation so the less informed don't get bored. It's this fast, energetic frustration with how the world always seems to cater to the rule breakers. So why does the tardy majority always win? Well, according to the source, it's all about faith. The latecomers have this unwavering faith in being late, while the punctual people, well, they lack the faith to actually enforce their own schedules. The author playfully exaggerates this point, saying that extreme faith, or what he calls fanaticism, literally shapes reality. He uses some pretty extreme examples to illustrate this, mentioning how the powerful Zonda wind of Argentina can shift geographical borders, or pointing to figures like Osama bin Laden and George W. Bush to show how absolute, unwavering belief, for better or worse, is what truly moves mountains in our world. Okay, moving on to section 2, the myth of high school. Now, our author admits that whole rant about waiting, yeah, that was just a stalling tactic before facing the real topic, the cold, mathematical reality of our teenage years. Let's walk through this calculation together. Really think about your high school experience for a second. You were there maybe 4 hours a day of actual instruction, right? That's 20 hours a week, 100 hours a month. Over 5 years of high school, that grand total comes out to about 4,500 hours. And here is where it gets crazy. If you take those 4,500 hours and divide them into 24-hour days, you get exactly 187.5 days. That's roughly 6.5 months. That's it. That is the shockingly small amount of actual time we spent inside those classrooms. The author points out the heavy irony here. I mean, if you just took a simple 6-month backpacking trip to India or Egypt or China, it would be significantly more life-changing than those scattered hours sitting at a high school desk. Which brings us to the ultimate question. Why on earth do we give it so much importance? Why do we hold on to this brief, mathematically insignificant sliver of time? Let's just take a pause here, because we're about to shift gears from analytical math straight into some pretty deep existential philosophy. This brings us to section 3, shadows of the past. So what actually keeps us coming back? The author completely dismisses the usual explanations like, healthy camaraderie. You get that at work, university, literally everywhere in life. It's not unique to high school. Let's look at the memories themselves. Are they truly memorable? A hideous concrete shoebox of a school building, singing silly songs on a bus during a spring picnic, someone slapping a hat on the skeleton in biology class, or a teenager staring at the angle of a classmate's legs. I mean, these are incredibly mundane. The author concludes that the only thing that actually makes this era stand out is the intense novelty of a first love or a first experience. Those intense firsts stand out so brightly, but really only because they're contrasted against what often becomes a, rather boring adult life. And that leads us right to the high school reunion itself. The author describes the reunion as Get this, a cruel parade of monsters. You go with this illusion of finding that beautiful rosy-cheeked youth from your memories, but what do you actually find? You find aging strangers. You find shadows. You find those ruins of the past that claim to have gone to school with you. Which takes us to section 4, the loss of illusions. All right, we've arrived at the crushing existential truth at the heart of this whole explainer. Let's be brutally honest for a second. Our teenage years, they were not a golden age. Actually, scratch that. They were more like an endless purgatory. Think about the grueling journey. It was all trial and error, acne, bad fashion, awkward phases. We moved from cheesy pop music like Miguel Mateos at 13 to Roxette at 15 to thinking Paulo Coelho was the absolute height of philosophy at 17 before finally discovering James Joyce at 19. It was a struggle. The reality is, we don't really remember the daily torture of growing up, we just falsely remember our curated greatest hits. When we're teens, we look at the future as total limitless potential. We imagined climbing Mount Everest. We thought we were going to be majestic lions and pumas, great scientists, adventurers, Don Juans, ballerinas. But then life happens. University, jobs, bills, just general adult obligations. We end up in this partial present. We look in the mirror, and the whiskers staring back at us aren't from a lion. They're the whiskers of a mouse. And the author points out that we mourn our youth not because we miss the school itself, but because we miss the time when we still had that beautiful illusion of limitless potential. And finally, section 5, behind that door. Now, it's not all doom and gloom here. The author actually reveals his own rebellious plan. He jokingly decided to be perfectly useless until age 40, simply because he believes the best is always yet to come. I mean, if you think your peak was in high school, what is the point of living the rest of your life, right? To really hammer this home, he turns to a stunning poem by Argentine poet Olga Orozco titled Behind That Door. Just listen to the resonance of these words. Somewhere in the great unfinished wall is the door, the one you did not open, and which casts its shadow of an implacable guardian on the reverse of your entire destiny. That perfectly represents the unfulfilled paths, those dreams we left behind in our youth that we so desperately wish we could revisit. The poem continues, and it gives us a warning. It is only a deception, a fabrication of the wind in the crevices of a barren history, false refractions that arise from oblivion when nostalgia touches it. The author is using Orozco's powerful words to show us that nostalgia, it's a deceptive trap. We literally cannot return to the untouched molds of the past. It's just an illusion. And then we get to these haunting final lines. That door is a sentence of lead. It is not a question. If you manage to pass, you will find behind it, one after another, the doors you chose. What a brilliant way to cement this idea. Looking backward doesn't give you a second chance. It only reveals the unchangeable choices you've already locked into place. Kind of like moves on a chessboard that have permanently altered the game. So I want to leave you with this provocative final thought. Are you spending your precious time staring at the heavy leaden doors of your past, mourning those 187 days of high school? Or are you ready to stop looking back and actively start building new illusions and expectations for the future? Because your peak isn't behind you in some concrete shoebox, it is waiting for you to create it right now. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep looking forward, and I'll see you next time.